time you see these images, they're always the same. You have these huge dinosaurs crunching across the arid desert. They're holding these huge tails. The tail of a dinosaur could weigh 10, 20 tons, which they're holding erect as they're looking around for prey in this sort of sunny landscape. It makes no sense.
Unless, that is, all that bulk is somehow supported.
Just imagine that the landscape was flooded with water. Now it suddenly makes sense. His huge tail is buoyant, it's floating in the water. It doesn't cause any energy drain. If he waves it, then it's going to help him swim. It becomes a swimming aid. And suddenly he's in an environment which is sympathetic to him. That arid mud wasn't arid at all. That mud was at the bottom of a shallow lake. The water took their weight, not their limbs.
Well, and you know what they did in this lake now that Professor Brian Ford is out with a new theory about dinosaur sex lakes. Hello everyone, this is CM Kosemen. It's a beautiful Saturday. We're just hanging around the house, and today I'll be talking to you about dinosaur sex lakes, too big to walk, and the bizarre world of Brian Ford. Now, before beginning, Brian Ford himself may listen to this podcast at some point, and if you do, sir, I am that unusual Turkish guy who visited you in the talk you gave in May 2018 at London's Conway Hall, and hello, and please don't take affront from anything I'm about to say in this podcast, because honestly and seriously, even though these are crank theories, I mean no disrespect and no slander towards everyone, but this is one issue that has gotten so much traction that it now needs to be talked about. Now, let me just open this door. I'm moving to our balcony with some coffee and my notes and my tape recorder. Yeah, that's how we roll in Kosemen Studios. It's the best way to podcast. Anyways, so hello once again. Hello everybody. I hope you've had a good week, month, whatever in the intervening time. And I hope everything is going well for you. Today we're going to talk about the extraordinary and bizarre theories of one Brian J. Ford, a self-described dinosaur expert who believes that all dinosaurs, no matter what species, lived in an endless vast sea in the prehistoric world. And he theorizes that dinosaurs were too big to walk on land. And not only that, but we are recording this in May 2019. And 1 month ago, he came up with this scandalous news that in order to reproduce, the big dinosaurs needed sex lakes. And because these sex lakes dried out, that's why the dinosaurs died out. So it was not a meteor strike or continental shift or whatever. It was the sex lakes that did them in, apparently. So, as anyone with the slightest interest in prehistoric life, dinosaurs, or even physics can tell, these ideas don't hold much water, as you can expect. I really don't need to debunk why this is such a senseless idea. I mean, why would the sex lakes claim the lives of dinosaurs and not any of the smaller kinds? You know, you had dinosaurs the size of turkeys, chickens, even smaller. You had all kinds of flying prehistoric reptiles, marine animals, blah blah. They all became extinct at the end of the Cretaceous era. If it was just the sex lakes, then yeah, if this theory was real, the big dinosaurs would have died out, but all the small things would have survived. But they didn't, so something else must be going on. Oh, it's a busy day. So anyways, I'm not here to debunk this theory. I mean, any high school student can do that already. Rather than that, I'm here to talk about this common phenomenon of the so-called cranks in mainstream science. And how they develop, how they think, and in a bizarre way, why we also always need them in order to keep ourselves on our toes. But let's do a little examination of Brian Ford's life and career first. You know, he came to attention last year as he published this book, Too Big to Walk. And this was published by HarperCollins, and it basically argued in long circular arguments why dinosaurs were too big to exist on land, and why the dinosaur science elite had a vested interest in teaching the lie about terrestrial dinosaurs, all those kinds of stuff. And I was actually present at this very pivotal point in the history of this thing, because in 2018 HarperCollins held out a debate in order to promote this book. So before telling you about the career of Brian Ford, let me go back and relive this memory. By a very, very happy coincidence, my wife and I were also in London at that time, and John Conway and Darren Naish were very kind to supply me with an invite to this event. So off we went. And I must also thank my wife, because not many people would sit through something like this. So it was out of the purest sense of love, I guess. So off we went to Conway Hall in central London. It's not named after John Conway. It's, I believe it's the meeting hall owned and operated by the British Society of Skeptics or Free Thinkers or some such society like that. So everyone was there. Darren Naish was talking against Brian Ford in this event, and obviously it went predictably. I mean, Brian Ford, I went there with an open mind. I wasn't accepting his theories, of course, not even theories. I wasn't accepting his hypotheses, of course, but you know, you would expect at least rational, positive, and civil debate. But as it turned out, this was one of the most bizarre events and bizarre talks I witnessed. I mean, Brian Ford didn't present any evidence, but he also pulled off some very strange stunts. I mean, one of the slides in the slideshow was actually a video of him and a friend in America, I don't know, some old guy. So they were talking about how they were taking down the establishment and how this book was going to change everything. And literally, I kid you not, in the middle of the slideshow, in this scientific debate, he showed us this movie about his friend and himself, like enjoying, yeah, this is like Chateau Merlot 1974. Now we're gonna pop open this wine, living the good life, and we're gonna bring down the establishment. I mean, they were saying words to this effect, and it was really like flabbergasting. I mean, certainly we were not confronting an ordinary scientist here. That's all I could say. And you know, if it was left at that, I could say, yeah, you know, he's a cranky guy, you know, let him enjoy his 15 minutes of fame. But then it turned out really ugly, really quick. I mean, Brian Ford was extremely insulting towards Darren. I mean, a few times, like when asked the question along the lines of why hasn't this pop theory gained recognition before, or something like that, he said like, well, it's because everyone else is stupid, and like staring directly at Darren, and he was really like pointed. I mean, I think he wanted to provoke a fight, but Darren really held out on his own. He presented a lot of evidence, and none of which Brian Ford could counter, actually. So he just retorted to these weird circular arguments. When confronted with evidence, he insulted his opponents, and he just said, you know, basically everyone else is stupid and I'm here to revolutionize dinosaur science. And that was one of the most bizarre events I ever participated in. I mean, I just can't even, And there was a break in the middle of the discussion session, and I actually approached Brian Ford, and I said, well, do you know that this theory of purely aquatic dinosaurs was also proposed by Klaus Ebel, another strange German scientist? And he was like, oh, yeah, search, and then he just, passed me along and whatever. But this event was bizarre. I mean, he was fixed with this idea that there's a dinosaur science elite and they're all stupid, and now he's here to change the world. And I think it's going to do some sort of wonderful public service, or I don't know. And he seems to be under the impression that the scientists in the dinosaur world, whatever that world is, are like making off with millions of dollars of public money in order to promote their views, which they certainly are not. And it was really strange because he was calling all these rational thinking people secret elites and whatever, and then it was him showing these videos of himself enjoying fine wines in a Colorado mountain chalet. So doubly interesting. And of course, at this point, there was also a guy from HarperCollins, the publisher, present. And, at the beginning of this interview or debate, he was really laid back. He was like, okay, what a fine event. Now we're going to have a discussion and exchange of ideas. But as Brian Ford spoke on and on, you could see the HarperCollins executive just sinking into the seat with what was undoubtedly a sense of cringe and shame. And after this event, a lot was written about this Brian Ford theory and whatever, and it quickly became obvious that the position was untenable. So HarperCollins really hush-hushed, and I don't think I've seen any more advertisement or promotion for this book afterwards. And it was like this, deformed cousin that you keep in the cellar. So this book was quickly passed along, and the wheels of publishing moved onwards. That's the thing with publishing, though. I mean, HarperCollins is a really respectable publisher, and it's really amazing how Brian Ford could get this one in, But when you actually look at the life of Brian Ford and his publications and some of the things he's written and said before, it becomes obvious. I mean, you can see him developing, and you can actually see why he could land this book contract with HarperCollins. And you can see how his ideas evolved in a way. So, let's begin. Brian Ford, by the way, is not a fresh random crank. He's actually quite an old guy. He was born in 1939, so he's almost 80 years old at the present. And he wrote a number of books before. And in fact, in the 80s and the early 90s, he was a really prolific author. But all his books seem to consist of popularizing actual science rather than engaging in novel research, So he had books like German Secret Weapons, Blueprints for Mars. I believe this was about the German advances in rocketry during World War II and how they led to the development of the moon rockets and so on and so forth. He had another book about Allied secret weapons, which was obviously a counterpart to the German one. Then he had a whole series of books about microscope and microscopy. The Mankind and the Microscope is one. There was one called the Optical Microscope Manual, so on and so forth. He has many books. He was very prolific, and I see no reason why there was anything wrong with these books. They were very popular science books. And there's a difference between popular science and real research. This is not to denigrate popular science. You really need it, and people who are good at real ex nihilo research are almost always really bad at popular science or popularizing science. So that's a real talent and a real skill set. And that's why I believe Brian Ford was able to garner such a reputation in his earlier years. And, I see no reason to call him a crank back then. This Dinosaur book came later. And maybe it was, obviously, I have no means of reading anybody's mind. But, during all those decades writing extremely popular science books, maybe he wanted to make a discovery on his own. So maybe that's why he latched on to this dinosaur theory so hard. But that's just conjecture. But if you just read some of the things he's writing, you can understand how Brian Ford begins to develop these ideas. For example, he's got a book called The Cult of the Expert. By the way, this is not some deep dive research, like you Google stuff for half an hour, you can reach all of these. So in The Cult of the Expert, Brian Ford promotes this book as follows. The Cult of the Expert is an ingenious attack on the experts who blind us with science, confuse us with jargon, frustrate us with bureaucracy, intimidate us with superiority, and have the power to access huge shares of public funds and make fundamental decisions that affect our lives. That's what he wrote. I didn't read the rest of The Cult of the Expert. This is just the blurb from Brian Ford's own website, which you can see below the Ford. Please visit it. So you can see that he had this idea developing for a while. He had this sense that the real scientists were somehow like fooling the rest of the public and making off with huge sums of money. And it's very similar because it's extremely similar to what he said during the debate, that he believed that dinosaur scientists were getting filthy rich by peddling and promoting their wrong theories. I mean, I don't know what sort of agenda that would set, you don't really get to play Illuminati by discovering dinosaurs. In fact, if I may say, dinosaur science, evolutionary science, well, maybe not evolutionary science, but paleontology in general is one of the areas of science that touches the least upon the real world. I mean, you can maybe discern new patterns at evolution or maybe come up with new attractions for museums, but if you take a really pragmatic look at things, if you study genetics, that has a footprint in medicine, in public policy. I mean, it does connect to the daily lives of people at the end of the day. If you study mathematics, obviously there's things you can do with computer science, defense, developing new algorithms, entertainment, everything. If you study physics, you can make bridges, roads, But if you study dinosaurs, all you can come up with, if you look at it pragmatically, are means and methods to get more people interested in dinosaurs. And it's a full circle. I mean, this is just the way it looks. It's not to denigrate dinosaur science or anything, but it really doesn't have much impact on the public good. It's a very mystifying sideline. Well, it can get you to a lot of places in art and scientific thinking, and when you study dinosaurs long enough, you get to have an appreciation of time, evolution, and life in general, which can make you a very interesting person. But it doesn't really translate well to new cars or new methods of computer imaging or new medicine. You just don't have that with dinosaurs. But that was a big sideline. Let's go back to Brian Ford. So it's surprising why he thinks that dinosaur scientists are this kind of cabal who are vested in secret funds and secret power, where in fact most dinosaur scientists I know are barely scraping by. Sometimes they have to do other jobs to sustain their lives. It just doesn't work this way. But anyways, this is Brian Ford we're talking about. So he seems to have this idea that all experts are phonies And you can see the evolution of his ideas that way. He's also very good at, okay, so this is what I call the auntie test. Take your standard issue baby boomer generation auntie. Brian Ford really fits the mold of a dinosaur scientist in an auntie's point of view. If you know what I'm saying, that he looks the part, he's tall, he's well dressed, he wears a bow tie. You heard his voice in the beginning of the podcast. He has this very arcane and sophisticated sounding voice. He's a really good speaker. He can string sentences together really well. And you would think that this is a no-brainer, but no, actually, some of the smartest people I met are really not good public speakers. But, when they get to do their work, a whole new set of magic appears, but it's not something that can pass the auntie test, A professional dinosaur scientist or someone who's made groundbreaking discoveries in dinosaur evolutionary history or whatever would probably not look like a scientist in the auntie test. Let's leave it at that. So Brian Ford passes that. So he's taken up the mannerisms and looks and modes of behavior that the general public would normally associate with scientists, and he plays this game really well. And maybe through his cultural capital that accumulated through his past books and through the way he appropriates the look and manners of a scientist, maybe that's how he could land this HarperCollins deal. But I believe this is going to be his last major book deal, unless he finds a kind of sensationalistic publisher, which would actually, there's no reason his books wouldn't sell well. They have sensation, they're very accessibly written, But anyways, then he has another book called The Patterns of Sex, and it's about his unusual look at sexuality and society. And by the way, now I'm going to tell you something about this book, but please don't confuse me with some sort of SJW. So Brian Ford says in this book, he says sexual explicitity should be encouraged at all levels, and then he says that attempts to abolish sexism could lead us to a desexed and imperfect society in the future. Now, I get around on YouTube, and I'm very familiar with these sort of bizarre channels that have this really skewed view of sexuality, and this is very similar to what they are saying. If Brian Ford was 20 years old, we would all know what kind of YouTuber he would make. Let's just leave it at that. And by the way, I don't mean this as an attack. His dinosaur theories don't need this weird misogynistic aside in order to fall down, because this is just the kind of guy he is, and I'm just exposing it. That's just all. So anyways, that was Brian Ford, and I think the best way he makes himself clear comes off at a recent interview about this whole sex lakes things, And I'm quoting from an interview on the Daily Star newspaper, which you can see on the links below. Brian Ford really, he doesn't need anybody debunking him, because his own words do this just as well. This is him. In the Daily Star, it said that for Brian Ford, science is not about collaboration, but combat. And he takes the greatest pleasure in rubbishing the belief of fellow experts. And he's quoted as saying, "Personal animosity is a greater stimulus to science than the contented spirit of enquiry can ever be." Now, how many wrong things can you count about this outlook of life? I can't even begin. It is true that personal vendettas played a big role in the development of science earlier on. Oppenheimer, the great scientist who spearheaded the atomic bomb program, for example. When he was in college, he tried to poison one of his professors with a apple laced with cyanide. He was slightly bonkers. And then, of course, in dinosaur science, who can forget Marsh and Cope, the great Bone Wars scientists? They had a big running competition between them, and in between them they named and discovered the majority of big dinosaurs in the North American continent. But they were also crooks. They were not above attacking each other's dig sites and so on and so forth. What really makes the way Brian Ford shoots himself in his own foot is the way he says that science is not about collaboration but combat. Yeah, maybe that would have been true if you lived in the early 19th century, where most areas in science were virgin territory and one man alone could go in and make really insightful discoveries. The theory, the framework for many things, evolution, time, fossils, was not really developed back then. So one man could go on and fight his opponents and could come up with the basic frameworks that would be followed for generations to come. But not anymore. In this day and age, science has become so freaking compartmentalized and so rarefied. Now you got people studying the colors of feathers by running fossils under a CT scanner. Now you got people sequencing the genes of 50 crocodiles and determining that one population in one branch of one river is actually a different species or whatever. One man alone cannot get really far in this day and age. And even if you have really sharp beliefs, you really can't get anywhere by, I am quoting, rubbishing the belief of fellow experts. No, you just state your points, stand behind them, cite evidence, and if you're right, you're right. It's like rap. If you could spit, you could spit, and that was it. But you could really see it. I wish you were in London. I wish somebody had a film of this event, that this guy was so misguided, and I could actually sense the sadistic pleasure he thought he was getting from attacking Darren personally, or someone asked him a question and he couldn't answer and he called them stupid in their face. You could see that he was really getting pleasure from this. Well, he's getting all the wrong sorts of pleasure, because to the outside world he looks to be in a really unenviable situation. Let's leave it at that. So he's a crank, and it's really sad to see someone who has published so many good books. Man, being a popular science writer is a great thing. You had so many good books. You popularized important things like military history and microscopy to so many people. I think you reached many more people than Darren Naish or I or somebody else in the dinosaur field did. You had it. Now why are you going along like this? I really can't understand. Maybe it's something that happens to people when they get old, and I hope I don't get old that way. But I'm not a real scientist. I'm just an amateur citizen scientist and a YouTube guy. A few other things besides, but that's beside the point. I hope when I get old, I don't get as cranky, cruel, vindictive, and as pathetic as Brian Ford was that day. He really fell on his own sword down there. Damn, man, what you doing? What you doing, man? But I'll end with an interesting note. We need people like this in science. We need people who believe in sex lakes or flying pterosaurs being the descendants of lizards, or we need people who create their own reptile journals out of spite and name 50 incomprehensible new species, that's just on their own. We need cranks, not because they're right, but they are like these vaccines that stimulate the rest of science to just, stand more solidly on our feet. And once in a blue moon, they actually do turn out to be correct. There are many more crank scientists in the realm of paleontology and herpetology. I actually spoke about the herpetologists, the two maverick herpetologists, Raymond Hoser and the other guy. You can see it on the description comments. There's a link to that video below. You need people like that. The world is more colorful with them. And I really don't believe in insulting these people or belittling them just for having wrong theories. I mean, they only need derision when they are derisive themselves, So there, yeah. And I hope we're gonna go through many more years with exciting discoveries and, yes, exciting cranks, because life would be much more dull without dinosaur science, or without seemingly inconsequential things like people getting worked up about the evolution of flying reptiles, or people having debates about whether dinosaurs were too big to stand on land, things like this. Life would be so much more duller. I dare even say that we would be robbed of the very thing that makes us human. It's not efficiency, it's the right, the luxury, and the mystery of being able to afford these fanciful philosophical excursions. It doesn't have to be about dinosaurs. It could be about anything. Like, it could be about theology, or the history of the Syriac Christians, or whether, I don't know, the nature of, the nature of faith in Jewish communities in Algeria, or whatever. You need these things, not because they make you intellectually superior, but a society is much more healthier by having people who dedicate their lives in them. You always need this phase space in which human thought, imagination, and intellectual endeavor needs to develop. And yeah, maybe these people don't make great CEOs, or they don't make great executives, or they don't invent a new car, or make a new iPhone, or make a new Tesla car, or you know what. But hey, not many people do that either. So there. Let's just summarize. Brian Ford thinks dinosaurs were too big to walk on land, thinks they needed sex lakes to reproduce, and he was a major cringe, not because his theories are faulty, but because he's somehow unnecessarily developed a vitriolic streak throughout his life. And at the end, for good or bad, we need people like him. Just a few, just to keep us on our toes. Because without them, life would be too boring. Anyways, that was that, guys. Please, there are many links below the fold about relevant things. There's Brian Ford's own website, things about the sex lake theories. You can find them all. I got a sore throat, but just drinking some coffee to help it along. But at the end of the day, also, don't forget, maybe chasing these wild tangents, it's not a side game, maybe it's the game itself. I know it's very encouraging, and it's very stimulating, and it's just a good part of my life to dedicate even this little YouTube time to the discussion of these things. So anyways, that was that, guys. Also, please consider supporting me through Patreon. It really helps. Where I live, the local currency is 6 to the dollar. So if you even pay me $1 per month, it gets me 6 liras, You know what that gets me? The best lunch in town. Just last month I was in some bizarre place in Anatolia. I filmed this enormous beetle, this gigantic metallic blue beetle, and it was just walking among these rocks that look like flesh turned into stone somehow. And you know what? That trip was funded entirely through Patreon donations. You made it possible. You make it possible. I mean, this weekend I could be doing a freelance job, but no, because you know what? I get that money off Patreon anyways. So thank you guys, and please consider supporting me. That was that. Have a nice day, and steer clear of the sex lakes. Goodbye.